Alright. It's weekly download time. Woo-ha! Alright. Apologies for the allergies and the hammering and stuff. This place is still very under construction. So yeah, it's kind of crazy here. But I was checking out the weekly download. Oh wait, hang on. I gotta restart this just a second. Alright. It's weekly download time. Woohoo! Exciting. Alright. Yeah! There we go. Now it's going. Okay. Alright, it's weekly download time. Yeah, we're back. I thought I'd redo the last weekly download just because the video streaming quality is so much better now that that we have the proper mic and everything. And there was all this like crazy construction and shit going on last time. So, alright, so today in the weekly download, I want to give you guys a bit of a rundown about how drum saturation works and a couple things you can do, to saturate your drums a little bit more. This is really a big weakness for a lot of people. So I want to basically explain a couple things, and then I'm going to show you some examples of saturation on drums, because I think it'll improve your music. Okay, so check it out, right? Let's get a drum break first, and I'll show you kind of some stuff. Yeah, let's use this one. Okay. So, I get a drum break here. I'm not going to bother quantizing it or anything. I just want to show you some stuff. So, check it out, right? When you are processing, there's basically a kind of triple relationship that you should know about, okay? So, the first thing we're going to talk about is EQ. But basically, there's going to be an EQ, some kind of a compressor, and some kind of a saturator on pretty much every channel in your track, pretty much. Unless you like, unless you have like a, unless you're doing something specially that you want it to sound very different from the other tracks. Most of the time, you're gonna have an EQ, a compressor, and a saturator on your tracks all the time. And the saturator is kind of where a lot of people are coming up short. So I'm gonna explain to you really how this whole process works. Okay, so let's say that this drum, you've decided this drum loop is not bright enough. That's a pretty well produced drum loop, but let's say it wasn't, and let's say you wanted it brighter. Okay? When I was first starting out, dumb me would have been like, I want this drum loop brighter, let's turn up the highs. Big mistake, okay? Don't do that. This is going to ruin your sound because this is a digital EQ and it is not designed to impart any color to the sound. So if you go boosting this EQ by like 6 dB or something, it's going to cause all kinds of like weird phasing that if you can't hear them now, you will learn to hear them and you will learn to hate them. So this is not the move if you want to make the highs louder, okay? EQ, digital EQ, is a subtractive process. So if you want to make the highs louder, instead of, here I'll put this at 6 dB. Instead of doing this, right, what you could do is take everything below that point down by 6 dB, like that. That is basically the same EQ shape, but because you're cutting and not boosting, it's going to phase a lot less. And then you would turn the whole EQ up 6 dB, okay? So when using a digital EQ, cut, don't boost, and then boost the whole signal after to make it brighter or to make it bassier or whatever. So cut, don't boost, okay? So don't do this, do this, okay? It just sounds better. You get less funky phasing and stuff. Sorry, I'm all allergic. There's like crazy amounts of dust in here. There's mad construction going on. Okay, so EQ, properly understood, is a subtractive process. Compression is also a subtractive process, right? Compression, what you're doing is you're making a threshold, let's say minus 6 dB. You're making a threshold after which you're going to decrease the amount of difference between the quiet and the loud parts of the signal. So this compression, you're basically decreasing the amount of dynamic range and then turning the whole thing up. So properly understood, compression is also a subtractive process. So usually in your chain, you're going to want to use some EQ at the beginning that is going to get rid of any unflattering aspects of the sound. So let's say you record a microphone in a room that sucks and you have a node in your room. You would first use the EQ to turn down the unflattering frequencies to get yourself a more flattering kind of look, and then you would boost the overall signal with compression, right? So EQ and compression are working together. EQ is eliminating unflattering, balancing out unflattering portions of the signal. Compression is increasing the overall volume. But what happens when you want to add to the signal? What happens when you want to boost, when you want to increase the presence of the signal? Well, that's where saturation comes in, okay? So what saturation is going to do, let's imagine, right, that this graph here in the saturator, let's imagine there's a sine wave, and that sine wave is going up and down, oscillating, right? This little graphic here is going to kind of show you what happens to that sine wave, right, as you exceed the maximum threshold, okay? So this top and bottom, that represents 0 dB, and then this is like minus infinity. So this is the DC offset. So let's say your voltage is represented by 12 volts, like in a modular system. This would be 12 volts. This would be minus 12 volts, and that would be like nothing, right? So if this was dB, this would be 0 dB. That would also be 0 dB, and then that would be nothing in the middle. So in these different okay, so let's check it out. Like, let's say that we were to clip this and just keep turning this up. If I turn this oscillator up, or turn this sample up, you can see that when we get to here, it's clipping, okay? So this would be a hard digital clip. If we were to render this file with the volume all cranked like that, this would be like a square up at the top, and then going down, and a square at the bottom, and going up at the top again. Okay, so that would be like squaring it off, and it would have a really kind of specific character to it. A digital style of clipping, and a digital style of clipping is not the most flattering, right? But sometimes you want it. Zeke Beats, for example, I was talking to him on his about his latest record, Devastate, and I was like, wow, man, it sounds like your shit is broken, but it's so good. And he was telling me, yeah, that he actually, when he was producing the track, was using the Ableton, like the hard clip. He was turning Ableton up until the volume meter went red, and then sampling it and bringing it back in because he liked that clipping for that particular application, right? So sometimes you want digital clipping. It's not a hard rule that you don't want digital clipping, but typically you don't. Normally you'd want an analog clip, and that's what you can see here. Then, like when you expand the saturator, it's a little clearer what is happening here. But imagine this is a sound wave like this that is swinging through to exceed the maximum threshold. Okay, so that's what that is representing in the saturator. And you can see here that when it hits here, there's like, it's not a hard clip. If I go to digital clip, that's a hard clip. Like you see, there's just like a harsh edge on that. And that clip there is going to have a different tone to it than an analog clip. An analog clip is going to be a little warmer, a little more forgiving. It's supposed to kind of emulate what it would be like if you overdrove like a channel strip on an analog mixing desk, right? Like, it's not like a component level emulation like a UAD or something, but it's emulating what it would be like there. Now, you can change the character of the clipping. Soft sine has a different clip. Medium curve I really like for drums. We'll get into that later. And then the hard curve is like a pretty extreme amount of clipping. You can see that if that were a sine wave, it would be really maxed to get an angle like that in the middle. So that angle is representing just how maxed the signal is. Sinoid fold, it basically turns the top into a mirror. So if you imagine the sound wave, when it instead of exceeding the threshold and getting lost, it's reflecting back off of the threshold. And that's a phenomenon called wave folding that can be very, very cool. My Make Noise modular, the DPO oscillator, works as a wave folding oscillator, and that's it's really cool. You can get some kind of cool harmonics with a wave folder. And then if you want to go really crazy, there's this wave shaper where you can do like wild stuff, like, whoa, what's going on here? And you can kind of like really mess it up and get interesting sounding clips. Like, what would that sound like? That's like some crazy wave folding action, like, you know. So the wave shaper gets pretty wild. And then the drive, this is like the amount of flattening out. So you can see here, if you drive it this much, the signal becomes pretty much entirely like flat. But yeah, so the Ableton Saturator, I typically will use a little bit of analog clip on a lot of things. Analog clip is very forgiving. It's very warm. You can overdrive it pretty hard and not have a big problem. Also, like, check it out. If I take this break, I'm going to put it just back to 0 dB. So I'm not boosting it anymore. And I'll put the analog clip on, and you'll watch, you can barely hear anything. Like, if there is a difference, it's extremely slight, right? But I'll show you what analog clipping sounds like when it turns up, and keep your eye on the VU meter. So you'll notice what happens is the transients fall apart, and it's boosting the signal a bit. So now a lot of people will, because you want to keep, anytime you're A/Bing to see if a process is worth it, you want to be able to level match the signal so that you're not just making it louder, because you will typically pick the louder signal given the option, right? Like, the louder one is always going to sound better. So what I've seen a lot of people do is group this and then map the output and the drive to the same thing. Have the drive start at 0 and go to 36. Have the output go like minus 36. But watch what happens when to the VU meter when I do that. So what I'm trying to do is use this output gain to match the drive. But if you look, there's not a one-to-one relationship. So you see how it's just making it quieter and more distorted. So if you do want to make a level matched drive knob like I did here with the rack, right, what you do is you turn it all the way up, and then I'm going to go here, so this would be minus 12. Maybe minus 6. So it's probably more like minus 4. But yeah, so now you can see we have a level matched drive knob. Oh, maybe minus 6, maybe minus 5. So you can see it's increasing the gain, it's increasing the drive without actually increasing the volume. Right? So that is a kind of handy thing you can do with saturators that helps, but you'll have to do that differently for each of the curves, like here. So medium sine, here, I'll turn this off for a second. Let's get another saturator out here. So now check this out. If you go, and I like this one a lot on drums, the medium curve, right? And I'll turn it off and on so you can hear it. So you can see it immediately sounds a little bit better, but there's also a bit of gain being added, even with it at 0 dB. Let's just try -1. Yeah, it's not a huge amount of gain. Yeah, so there's a little bit of gain being added, minus 0.4. Yeah, say minus 0.5. Yeah, there we go. That's about it. Or I'll say minus 0.6 dB. Minus 0.6 dB. So you can see here, even with them level matched, that's really adding a lot of punch to the drums. It sounds especially good on drums, this preset. So if you're going to try and make a level matched curve for that, I'd go map that, and then this one was 0 at minus 0.6. So the output was 0 at minus 0.6, and then that was 0 at 0. And then let's turn it up and see what happens. Okay, so that's crazy. So let's say minus 7. Say minus 5 maybe. Yeah, that's pretty close. So now we have a level matched drive knob for here. So it's going to keep it at pretty much minus 6 the entire time, and we can just see the effect of the drive without fooling our ears with the loudness. So you can see a little bit sounds nice. Like that's really bringing out the presence in the drums, but too much is bad, right? So sometimes when you do want a more aggressive tone without actually ruining all your transients, what you can do is take the wet dry. So now you can see I have that aggressive kind of distorted saturator tone. But it's really bringing a lot of presence to the drums, but not destroying the transients. Other things you can do are this bass knob here. This bass knob is reducing or accentuating the distortion on the lower frequencies. So watch what happens when I take the bass knob down. Right? So the bass is coming through, but it's fucking up our level match here. So here, I'll put this back onto dry. See, now the level match is a mess. So we got to redo these. So you can see there's really no easy solution to this level matching thing. Okay, so you'll notice that that's a problem. So some genius decided to put this soft clip on the saturator. And this soft clip is essentially a hard limiter. So watch what happens when I put this on. Right? So once that's on, now I can take this off. And I can drive it as hard as I want, and it'll never actually exceed 0 dB. The problem is that that does that by limiting it, so you lose all of your dynamic range. So I, generally speaking, will prefer to do it with a level matching macro than with the soft clip, because I like to preserve my dynamic range for later. Okay, so that's basically a couple things about the processor. So now this curve or the color is really nice. You can preserve your bass here. And then this is like a bandpass filter, this frequency. So you can, let's say you have an area of the filter that you want to accentuate, you would turn depth up, and that would be like boosting, like a peak. See? I'll crank it. See, you hear that moving around? I'll make it real narrow. Right? I typically will use it to dip. A lot of the time things will need a dip out of the mids, for example. See, it sounds way better like that. So I'm gonna put this on the drive, and then say 0, and then I think this is gonna be -1. Turn that down. Yeah, that doesn't seem like. Oh, even though I turn that drive up. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's max it, and then we get our level. There we go, so that's level match now. Why is that so cranked? I think I gotta change our level match. Okay, so that should start at -6 now. Yeah, the bass curve here really changes this basic level. There we go. Okay, and then I'm gonna take this level down a bit further. There we go. So you can really hear it's like bringing that. So the bass is intact, the transients are intact, and it's really warming it up. So I'll turn it off and on. Right, so now I want to show you some of these in some more real world examples rather than just a drum break. Okay, so here, so different kinds of saturation that you can use. Erosion is a really good one. Well, here on the break, I just high pass this drum break here. I'm going to take all these off for now, and then I'll just show you. I used a couple different kinds of saturation on this drum break here. Okay, so basically I got this drum break, and I want to beef it up because it's not like it's not punchy enough and it's not loud enough. So what I'm going to do is high pass it so that there's no sub, and then add a kick first. So let's add the kick, and the kick is here. So I used a 128 and just selected and selected and selected until I found one that sounded nice. So you hear that kicking? Right? And then put a little snare in there. Right? Now, other kinds of saturation that work, I will often use a medium curve saturator without any wet dry on the drums, individual drum hits. So I'll see what that sounds like. I'm going to just solo the kick, and I'll show you what just medium curve saturation sounds like. See, it just makes it a little harder. I'll take that down to level match it a bit. There we go. Always level match. Yeah, it just gives it a little bit more. So leave a little bit of medium curve saturator. Don't go too crazy on the drive, but just have a little bit of that medium curve on your drum hits, and they'll sound really good. Erosion can be really good for the highs. It's kind of like a reduction effect. Right, see it, turn that up. And you can either have it be just like an oscillator. I like this wide noise or noise, and then just a touch. It almost sounds like, you know when you hit a kick drum and the snare rattles a little? Almost sounds like that. So in the snare, I put on some medium curve saturation, and oh wait, here, let's get the snare out. On the snare, I put in some medium curve saturation, and then I put it on a wet dry. So it's that nastiness, but on a wet dry. And then you can see I've taken the bass down to preserve the bass, and I've taken a scoop out, a big scoop out of the mids there, right around where the snare is at 2K. And then that way that transient at 2K is going to be cutting through, and the bass is still going to be cutting through because I've removed the saturation from those two areas. So the bass, I've turned it down to preserve the sub and the lows, and then I've turned this down. So we're really just getting saturation on the highs. See, it's just bringing those highs up a bit, right? And then together, so these layers sound a little dumb under the drums, but they're really designed to not draw too much attention themselves. They're just there to provide some weight and some impact on the drums. So now hear them with the break. Right? So now, once again, I'm going to put medium curve saturator on the whole group now, and it's going to glue the whole group together. Now, I like using overdrive with a little bit of wet dry too, and that little bit of wet dry is essential because if you overdrive it all the way wet, it'll degrade the signal too much. Check it out. Right? That's way too degraded. But if you just bring a touch of that in, it does really nice things to the highs. But you see the way all the highs open up there? And then I like to use the glue compressor with just a little bit of compression. Really short release time on drums because you don't want them to hang around too long after. You don't want the compression to hang around too long after the drum hits. But yeah, so just a little bit of gentle compression, 2-to-1 compression, and that'll glue it together. So now just do all that as a before and after. And you can see, so I'm not really saturating too much at any one stage. It's just a little bit of saturation at each stage, but a little bit goes a long way when it comes to this stuff. So this is everything off, and you can just hear the drum break with the kit under it. See how it sounds like 2 layers? The transients aren't that tough. It's not really like tight, you know? Little dull. Here, I'll put a spectrum analyzer too, so you can see here. You see this is like big hole in the mids. The highs aren't that bright. Now watch. You see how it evens out the roll-offs? It's a bit more highs. I'll even turn the mic off. Listen for the kind of like vinyl texture in the sample and just the feeling of unity and like punchiness and clarity in the drums. Like it almost sounds like muffled before, and not like, it sounds like 2 layers, whereas it sounds clear and crispy and vinyl-y and nice and all unified in the second version. Listen again. But yeah, so that's a little bit about how you can use saturators on your drums. You can also add an exciter and do lots of other things, but I find just that little bit of saturation really really goes a long way. Just don't forget to level match. You can make that quick level match rack if you want, or you can just kind of do it manually, but don't forget to level match when you're A-Bing. And recognize that every time you process in the digital domain, you're gaining something, but you're also potentially losing something. So you got to really be careful with your trade-offs. I find a little bit of saturation really helps on every channel. And I pretty much will use subtractive EQ first. Remember, additive EQ bad, subtractive EQ good. And then I will use subtract dynamic range with the compressor. And then once I have, balanced the sound with EQ and gotten the dynamic range kind of where I want, I will saturate it to bring up what's good. So you subtractive EQ to remove what's bad, compressor to remove the peaks so that your levels are a bit more even, and then saturate from there, and then normally more EQ and stuff later. But yeah, a little bit goes a long way. You're looking for a cumulative effect of a lot of subtle things that you maybe can't, like, you're not really ever trying to apply dramatic effects when you're mixing. It's always just a little here, a little there, and then they add up to a big effect that you notice it when it's gone, but when it's there, you kind of don't notice it. So you want to make your effects that you miss them when they're gone, but they're transparent. You don't really hear them, at least when it comes to mixing. So yeah, one more time, and then we'll call it. But yeah, so that's the effect. Like, there's no compression happening there at all. That's just all just little bits of saturator, little bit of erosion, little bit of overdrive. So get to know those plugins. They're really, really important. They come with Ableton. They're really great. All right, so I think there's some questions here, so I'm gonna go check them out. Yeah, Mike, you don't need money to be a producer. I know many producers who write music and are homeless. You really just need to arrange your life so that you have the time that it takes to get good at music. Because you can produce on any shitty computer. I mean, like, think of all the music written in the past. They didn't have amazing computers. So you can write music on any piece of shit computer. There's all kinds of free stuff on YouTube. People are doing free tutorials and stuff, so you don't really need to go to a school. And there's all kinds of free software out there. So really, I mean, money sounds like a great excuse, but it's actually no excuse at all. And I think a lot of the time when people rationalize why they're not doing something, they'll use money to rationalize it, but it just sounds good to say, oh, well, I can't afford it, and it must be nice for these other people who can't afford it, but you figure it out, man. You figure it out. So just buy yourself time. Don't buy yourself equipment or computers. Buy yourself time to put into music. Yeah. Cool. Okay, sweet. I'll see if there's any questions over on YouTube to put into music. Oops. Okay, cool. All right, so that's it. I think that's the weekly download for this week, or at least, the second version of it. Hopefully that'll be better than the distorted version with the crappy audio. I'll be back with more real soon. Lots of love, everybody. Peace.